Hey guys, so Black and White Green and B here. I want to try this out since I feel like I started taking a journey down this road with my last God Mazinger video, and this is going to be one of my first ever manga reviews, so check that out. Now, last week I reviewed God Mazinger the anime, and I found it to be an awful, rotten, sad excuse for an 80s anime. But despite that, it had this weird vibe to it. It had a lot of pieces that just didn't fit together right. They didn't add up, and there was undeniably something there that I just wasn't getting from all these raw elements that had this strange raw potential to be good if only they were executed slightly differently. So lo and behold, I picked up the manga, and the manga was actually good, by fair enough taking the same concepts and executing them slightly differently. Now, I need to preface before I do this review that this is a manga from the early 80s. It contains numerous images of naked women, full frontal nudity, scenes of gratuitous sexual assault, and probably at its worst, it has some outdated, fantastical racial concepts which are scientifically incorrect and really, really offensive for blacks and Asians. So that being said, this is an adult manga, so don't read it if you're a kid. There's nudity and killing and all that shit. Now, that being said, Go Nagai is a freaking great manga artist. I've definitely read more manga by him than anyone else who's an author, so yeah, Go Nagai is great. If you haven't read his Devilman, that's a masterpiece. That's like the one he tried the hardest with. Anyway, I'd read some of his other Mazinger mangas, and they were really super short situations. In those mangas, Mazinger pretty much just came out of nowhere, rushed straight at its final boss, murdered the final boss, and the manga ended very shortly. Oddly enough though, God Mazinger isn't quite like that. It clocks in at a pretty hefty 19 chapters, making it one of the longest mangas Go Nagai has ever written. However, I would go so far as to say that 40% of this manga, a lot of the pages are just big swooshes where Mazinger swings its sword and a bunch of people's heads pop off, so you can definitely read all 19 chapters in an hour like I did if you really give a damn. So anyway, before we start, let's go over the big differences. So the biggest difference between the anime and the manga is the anime was meaningless. It was a directionless anime mostly targeted towards kids, and the manga meanwhile is a hardcore adult-oriented manga with non-stop murder, non-stop nudity, a splash of psychological horror, and a bit of weird biblical shit. Let's start with the characters. So, unlike the brainless jock from the anime, Yamato Hino in the manga is a horrific, super chad, take no shit from anyone, borderline rapist with psychic powers, which he just uses to mostly harass women at his high school and gaslight his annoying girlfriend, Kaoru. Kaoru, meanwhile, just gets non-stop shitted on such an otherworldly level that I have never seen before, like, for any, fictional girls in, any kind of media. Now, to start with, Yamato kind of reminds me a little bit of Akira Fudo from Devilman, but Akira Fudo started off as a nice guy and then turned evil. Yamato is just kind of a dirtbag from the start, and I guess he matures by the end of the manga. There's also Ira Mu, the third biggest character in the manga. In the manga, she's a crazy, mature, adult woman sex goddess with these definite hips that don't quit, and she comes off like a mix of Sayaka from Mazinger Z and Cleopatra from History. Otherwise, she's basically the same character from the anime personality-wise, but she's just way more competent and she's not a victim like she was in the anime. God Mazinger, the robot, the statue, whatever, is also explained much better in the manga in a way that it actually makes sense now. Apparently, the way they describe it, it's a robot covered in a statue, possessed by a demon that may or may not be an actual god, or maybe it's the statue of a giant robot. At least the manga actually tried to explain it. The show just took the vague hints from the manga and went nowhere with them. Now, finally, just to make this manga review interesting, and because the chapters in this manga were so completely different from chapter to chapter, just to make sure I cover my ground properly, I'm going to individually talk about each chapter. Chapter 1. So, Chapter 1 of God Mazinger starts off in the Kingdom of Mu 20,000 years ago, It is a savage land where people run around naked, stabbing each other in their muscles. Queen Iramu dances naked for her god, the God Mazinger. Meanwhile, across town, a group of Aztec-looking Indian guys are lined up to welcome their great king, the Great King El Dorado, who is scary as shit. There was a character like this in the anime, but this character had no personality and he was barely touched upon. I don't know if he was a king like he is in the manga, but in the anime he was basically just a Boba Fett, strong, silent, heavy type. In the manga though, he's King El Dorado and he's fucking insane. His mask has a fucking insane like goblin face on it, and he's just like pure threatening crazy. Meanwhile, at the same time in modern day Tokyo, Yamato Hino has a dream that he sees a statue of himself, and he always dreams that he's naked. His asshole dad wakes him up to go to school, but instead of going to school, he starts an insane fucking fight with his father, tells his father that he wasted his life, calls out his very sexy stepmother, and he and his dad punch the shit out of each other. Just wow. The departures from the anime to the manga are like instant. So on top of being a massive jerk asshole, Yamato Hino is the superhuman with incredibly strong psychic powers, specifically of telekinesis. He literally flies to school like he's Goku and then uses his telekinesis to flip up the skirt of any woman he sees that he feels like seeing their panties. However, the only person who knows this is his sort of girlfriend Kaoru. Okay, Kaoru is not his girlfriend, she's more like his next door neighbor. In a normal manga or anime, I guess she would be. They have a light romantic relationship with each other. Kaoru seems to care for him, but he finds her annoying and ultimately barely doesn't care about each other. Also, she knows he has psychic powers, but because of that, I want to say she's borderline afraid of him. Anyway, Kaoru and Yamato corner each other at school, and they get into a fight about a bunch of different things. First off, Yamato has psychic powers, which he uses for evil. Yamato says he hates school. Yamato wishes he could go back in time and be a samurai, which is very specific and weird considering the series. Anyway, Kaoru starts pressuring Yamato to be a responsible man and not use his psychic powers for committing pranks and other stupid shit. But Yamato just turns super dark and evil at this point and threatens to straight up rape Kaoru. Kaoru says she wants to be friends with him if he rapes her, but he starts letting his psychic powers go crazy and he starts stripping the clothes off her with his telekinesis. Now at this point, Yamato sees a vision of God Mazinger and also a naked vision of Iramu. Apparently from now on, every time he uses his psychic powers, he's going to be more and more connected to God Mazinger. So that's chapter 1. They start off mostly grounded in Japan, and believe it or not, that was one of the heavier story chapters. Chapter 2 starts off with a massive army of Mechasauruses riding into battle in Mu. The king of El Dorado attacks Mu, and half this chapter is just dinosaurs burning the city down. There's a big interlude where a bunch of naked ladies are chilling out by a lake. And in this chapter, there's pretty much page after page of naked lady spreads, of just naked ladies doing actions, and then dinosaurs coming to eat the naked ladies. One naked lady kills some warriors and escapes on a horse. And then when you can't think you can get any more naked ladies, there's a long, boring-ass scene of Yamato doing kendo. He says this is boring and he hates it because he thinks it's inferior to real combat. And that's chapter 2, easy peasy. Chapter 3. Chapter 3 is a more continuation of the violent pornography that we got in chapter 2. In chapter 3, several naked ladies are being burned at the stake and cut up by the Dragonian warriors who are like cannibals or whatever. Anyway, the story finally resumes and we get to Iramu and her advisor Muraji contemplating the big war with the Dragonian Empire. Now, this is an important point for later, but Ira drops the story beat that if Mu is ever defeated in battle, the whole continent will fall into the ocean. So that's important. Anyway, Muraji wants to negotiate with the Dragonians, but Ira says their only chance of victory is outright killing the Dragonian king because he's a crazy person. Then the one naked lady from chapter 2 who escaped arrives at the castle and Ira promotes her to a warrior woman, and then they decide to move the army out to the wasteland to avoid damaging the city. They briefly touch on Yamato obsessing over seeing Iramu, and then Iramu goes to the top of her castle where the god Mazinger is entombed inside a mountain. At the same time, Yamato and his classmates leave on a bus trip. That's Chapter 3. Chapter 4. So half of Chapter 4 is a massive crazy battle between the Dragonians and the Mu army, where the Mu army suffers heavy consequences and lots of people die. Now, meanwhile, that bus that Yamato and his class are on get entirely isekai. That's a huge difference from the anime. So the bus just full-on gets teleported to Mu and immediately squashes several soldiers as it lands on them. But then more soldiers show up to attack the bus, fire arrows into it, and Yamato's class gets fucking slaughtered. Only Yamato and Kaoru manage to escape because Yamato uses his psychic powers to shield them. Yamato tells Kaoru that she's weighing him down and that if she can't keep up running with him, she's going to get killed. So Kaoru declares her love for Yamato at this point, but it feels like she's just saying that because she's going to get murdered. Yeah, Kaoru's a faker anyway. At this point, Iramu teleports Yamato to her castle, and he's completely thrilled about that. Kaoru, meanwhile, is screwed over and left for dead, and Kaoru's nightmare is only beginning. It just gets worse for her as it goes on. That's Chapter 4, here's Chapter 5. Chapter 5 starts off with Iramu naked again, which you just see everything. Now, she is actually wearing clothes, but her clothes are apparently made of soft silk, so whenever the author feels like showing the details, he can. Yamato and Ira finally talk, and Ira reveals that the Mulians are the descendants of aliens, and that they need Yamato to pilot the great god Mazinger because he is 20,000 years from the future, and therefore he's a more evolved Mulian who has evolved to have the psychic power needed to pilot god Mazinger. Now at this point, god Mazinger activates and eats Yamato up, and apparently Yamato is actually not really its pilot, and more actually its battery. So god Mazinger awakes, goes full berserk, uses Thunder Break to kill some Mechasauruses, and then after that goes crazy berserk, squishes a bunch of Dragonian soldiers with his bare hands, and then after a few hours of mass murdering the army, Yamato finally regains his consciousness inside the god Mazinger and realizes he's committing massive mass murder. Chapter 6. Okay, so we go back to modern day Japan. Yamato's dad regrets that Yamato has disappeared, but his stepmom calms him down and assures him that he'll eventually come back. Meanwhile, we're introduced to Seiji Hayami and Honey Kitsuragi, who I think are depowered versions of the main characters from Cutie Honey. Anyway, they're investigating this bus disappearance. They go up to this inn in the mountains, and an old man tells them to look into a family that studies ancient myths. Meanwhile, god Mazinger is just about done its rampage. We get a shot of the school bus with no survivors except Kaoru, who survived by hiding under a rock. She declares that she hates Yamato and journeys off into the wasteland to have her sad little adventure. God Mazinger, meanwhile, continues fighting the King of El Dorado, who shows up on his pterodactyl. Chapter 7. Chapter 7 is literally just a massive battle between God Mazinger and the King of El Dorado's pterodactyl. They whoosh back and forth, El Dorado eventually loses, and God Mazinger turns back into a statue. When he does this, he pukes up Yamato, and Iramu shows up on a horse and declares that they need to build a camp around the god Mazinger to protect it while it's a statue. Chapter 8 is a huge chapter. So Chapter 8 starts off with Cutie Honey and her boyfriend reaching this house where they go to hear a story about the ancient history. Now, it passed me over on my first read, but I realized that the old man and his daughter that they go to see are also members of the Hino family. So they are actually relatives of Yamato. Anyway, the old man gives them the scoop that the Japanese people are actually descendants of Mulians, who are actually space aliens, and then we strangely get into this, and then we flip back to Mu and the main story. So in Mu, we revisit the wreckage of the school bus for the third and final time. Now, after being told twice that no one survived this school bus isekai massacre, 4 high school students crawl out of the wreckage, having presumably faked their own deaths and hidden under the dead bodies to stay alive. One of them is Yamato's kendo friend, and he's also down to become a samurai in this feudal time. And the other kids are just massive liabilities waiting to die. Anyway, meanwhile we go back to the god Mazinger camp where Yamato has a nightmare where he turns into a dinosaur and then he wakes up. He talks to Iramu, and meanwhile King El Dorado is talking to his witch about how Mazinger defeated, and he wanted to know if Mazinger was a robot or not. Yes, dear God, yes. Finally, someone asked this question. I've wanted to know the answer to this for months now. So the witch explains that the Mulians came to Earth before, lived in outer space, and they all had Gundams, but their Gundams sucked. Meanwhile, God Mazinger is a super robot, and it's more than a robot. It's apparently only part robot, and apparently it's beyond a robot because it also has the soul of a demon inside it, which makes it technically alive since it has a soul. Now, the witch says the only chance of defeating God Mazinger is if they use their own god, which is the death god Hades. Then we go back to Yamato at the camp, and now he started to finally wear the toga costume from the anime, only it has like disgusting male panty shots going along with it because Go Nagai just couldn't help himself. And anyway, Yamato gets this annoying, crappy kid servant. The kid servant only shows up a few other times, and he's just this annoying little kid. Yamato suddenly remembers that he left Kaoru for dead in the desert, so he tries to rush off to save her, but the Mulians won't let him leave the camp. He beats a bunch of them up, but finally Ira comes out and says that they searched the bus, there were no survivors in the bus, and apparently she sent some guys to look for Kaoru, but it's not looking so good because it's been so long. So chapter 9, we check in on Kaoru. Apparently Kaoru wandered for days through the desert and eventually reached a jungle full of tiny monster animals. Now Kaoru is taking this very badly as a below average pampered city girl, and things are not looking great for her. She suddenly encounters a group of extremely racist looking black cannibal cavemen who are raping and eating white women. Kaoru is so happy to see this. She's so happy to see other people that it takes her a couple of minutes to register that they are black cannibal cavemen eating and raping white women. So she realizes this and she shits her pants. Now the cavemen rush out to greet her and they instantly strip her naked with their spears. And then we hard cut to a single page explaining that the old man is still telling the story to Cutie Honey. And the old man explains that the Mulians were actually originally aliens who looked like angels. They had feathers, they had wings, they had antennae. But they terraformed the earth, made all the animals, and once they had done this, it still wasn't actually good enough for them. So they had to turn themselves into humans because their original angel forms could not survive in Earth's harsh environment of oxygen and all that. So anyway, meanwhile in Mu, a super ripped dude shows up to save Kaoru from the cannibal cavemen by slaughtering them all and riding off with her in a pillowcase on a dinosaur. Chapter 10. Chapter 10 is stupid. The entire chapter is just a dumb, stupid battle. Yamato goes into God Mazinger. God Mazinger reveals it has the power to teleport. And the entire chapter is just God Mazinger kicking guys, killing dinosaurs, and throwing its weight around. At the end of the chapter, King Eldorado reveals that he's going to unleash the demon god Hades to defeat God Mazinger. Okay guys, this is the middle of the manga. We are actually halfway done. This is the end of volume 1. Takes us to volume 2 in chapter 11. So God Mazinger is still in the big battle from the last episode. At this point, these 3 psychic monks show up to fuck up God Mazinger, and they make him fall inside a hole. When he falls inside the hole, inside he finds a massive alien spaceship. God Mazinger opens a door in the spaceship and lets loose this god-awful xenomorph abomination. He spends the rest of the chapter fighting the xenomorph. There is no plot. Chapter 12. We are still in the massive battle from chapter 10. Those 3 psychic monks from the last chapter have now grown into giant titans. The Mu horseback army is still fighting against them, but the army is losing because they don't have God Mazinger, and now they're fighting a giant enemy. God Mazinger, meanwhile, is still fighting the xenomorph inside the spaceship. And plot twist, apparently this is the demon god Hades. On my first read-through, I thought this was just a nameless alien and Hades never showed up. But actually, it's just this alien, which is actually really anticlimactic because he's not that threatening of an alien. Anyway, meanwhile, Ira fights those 3 psychic dudes, and at a certain point realizes that their giant titan forms are just holograms, so she locates their real bodies, and she kills them, which turns the military battle around. Chapter 13. So at this point, God Mazinger is still fighting the Hades xenomorph for like what seems like forever at this point. Eventually, Yamato passes out and has a nightmare that Mazinger loses, and that as a result, he has to face everyone he allowed to die. This includes a scene where Kaoru finds him in the dream and murders him. Then he wakes it back up, and God Mazinger continues fighting. Then, meanwhile, Iroh declares that something is about to happen that's going to be terrible, so she pulls her army out, and just as she's doing this, a massive explosion goes off and completely destroys the Dragonian army. Chapter 14. So literally the first half of this chapter is just the explosion from the last chapter, just blowing up more and more shit. God Mazinger eventually walks out of the explosion unscathed like a badass. So the Moon Kingdom declares the big battle is over and they won its victory. So at this point we introduce the Prince of El Dorado, who was the main bad guy from the anime at the end. Now, I guess he technically got introduced when he saved Kaoru, but this is the proper introduction explanation of who he is. He turns out to be pure evil, unlike the anime. He puts Kaoru still naked inside a crystal ball and then starts getting drunk and laughing at her, rolling around inside this ball all naked. Now, ironically, Kaoru has instant feelings for this guy because he's ripped and he's hot, which is ironically enough the complete opposite reaction of Princess Iroh from the anime, who just hated him for no good damn reason, even though in the anime he actually wasn't that evil. Like, in the anime, he was pretty benevolent, aside from the few times he betrayed people in self-defense, but in the manga, he's just a pure evil cunt. So, he has his wizard from the anime, and the wizard comes out and informs them that the army just lost this critical battle against Mazinger, and so Prince El Dorado goes completely nuts, and he declares that he's going to wage his own war on God Mazinger because he doesn't like the way his father has been doing it. He also thinks that the fact his father wears a golden mask is stupid. He thinks the mask looks stupid. Actually, it looks pretty cool. Anyway, at this point, he turns back to Kaoru, and he tells Kaoru that he's adopted her, and that he's decided to keep her as a pet. Now, at first I thought this might go like in a pretty dark direction, and it does. It does, actually. It's revealed that Prince El Dorado has psychic powers that are different from Yamato. He has telepathy, and that apparently at this point the crystal ball that Kaoru was inside is actually a biological transformation machine that all the aliens used to originally turn themselves into humans. So he uses it on Kaoru to see what would happen, and it ends up devolving Kaoru into a cat with a human face. He renames Kaoru Iramu as a joke, and we never see Kaoru again. I hate this so much, but that's her ending. They mention her a few more times in the story, like the narrator does, but you never see her again, so that's just the end of Kaoru. Kaoru goes from being the main character's girlfriend to being almost raped by him, almost eaten by dinosaurs, almost raped by a gang of cannibal cavemen, seemingly wanting to be raped by El Dorado after all that bullshit, and now she's a fucking cat. That's her game over. Now, back in present day, the old man telling the story explains that the Dragonians were also aliens who turned themselves into humans, except instead of being angels originally, they were these squid monsters. So, Chapter 15. Chapter 15 starts off another huge medieval battle for the most chapter. But then the king of El Dorado comes out to make a direct attack on God Mazinger. Except just as this is about to happen, the Prince of El Dorado shows up to do his own attack using an army of ancient alien flying saucers. At this point, the king of El Dorado and the Prince of El Dorado get into an argument because they're cutting each other off. The king says that the prince is being stupid because the flying saucers will destroy the earth. The prince says that the king is being stupid because he's trying to beat a giant robot with men on horseback. Honestly, they both make good points. So the flying saucer lets loose its payload, which is apparently an army of xenomorph machine beasts from the classic Mazinger Z series. So the Xeno machine beasts are like a cross between the classic Mazinger machine beasts and aliens. Like they have aspects of both. Anyway, it fires off an Independence Day beam gun at the statue of God Mazinger, and it completely explodes it and destroys it. So then we come to Chapter 16. Oh, and I hate that in Chapter 16 the opening narrator says that he wonders what happens to Cat Girl Kaoru, because that plotline just never gets resolved. Anyway, so Prince El Dorado declares that he's been victorious, because he's blown up God Mazinger, and then his Xeno machine beasts slaughter the Mu army, and that literally fills like the entire chapter. Then he's about to capture Ira Mu when his father, King Eldorado, actually attacks him. His father is now pissed because apparently continuing to allow the Xeno machine beasts to run free is a very bad thing, because they'll wander the entire Earth, non-stop killing everything they see, and it will be very hard to stop them the longer they're let free. So Princess Ira tries to get her army to pull back, but it's too late because the Xeno machine beasts shoot a nuke at them, and then another one lets loose a bunch of acid rain, and another one uses a chemical weapon to annihilate the survivors. So the Mu army is just obliterated. So meanwhile, Prince Eldorado is still being destroyed by the psychic waves coming off of his dad. His dad demands that he stop using the Xeno machine beasts before they destroy the Earth. And Yomito the wizard tells King Eldorado that it's actually cool because Prince Eldorado defeated God Mazinger. And the Xeno machine beasts will have killed everyone in Mu in the next 2 days. So King Eldorado acknowledges these facts and agrees to let them run wild for 2 days. But he is very suspicious that Yomito is actually manipulating Prince Eldorado and might be a third, divisive evil power. Anyway, meanwhile, God Mazinger reforms itself from its shattered pieces and then immediately comes to life and goes berserk. Elsewhere, the Xeno machine beasts are still going around genociding the Mulians, and finally God Mazinger shows up, and it's twice as big as the Xeno machine beasts, so it starts easily killing them as fast as it can. Then the Flying Saucer comes back to try and Independence Day God Mazinger again, but this time, since it's fully awake, it smacks the beam back at the Flying Saucer and destroys 5 of them. Alright, chapter 18, we're almost done. So Prince Eldorado is absolutely horrified his Flying Saucer army is losing. So he escapes in an escape pod and goes back to the Dragonian Kingdom, where King Eldorado is meanwhile just going fucking insane and killing all of his generals. He finally takes off his golden mask and reveals that underneath, his face is melting off. Apparently the main reason he was invading Mu was that Mu had a thing called the El Mu he heard of, which he thought would cure his illness. But apparently he's run out of time, his arm falls off, and he just straight up dies. Now, God Mazinger is continuing to clean up the Xeno machine beasts, but then it explodes and a massive psychedelic scene starts. So Yamato appears naked inside space, and apparently there's actually an entire universe inside God Mazinger. So now that he's inside this universe, he starts having a conversation with the soul of God Mazinger. God Mazinger says it has to destroy the island of Mu at this point, and Yamato asks who he is to do that. So God Mazinger reveals himself as a literal god. By the way, if you watched Mazinger Z Impact 10, you know this god as Zeus. So finally, this is the last chapter, chapter 19. Now, I feel that by all accounts, this manga probably got canceled, and Go Nagai only had this chapter to wrap up the whole story. So he does this in the absolute worst and messiest way possible. So chapter 19 starts off with the entire city of Mu being destroyed in an earthquake. Then we go back to the Isekai survivors who we haven't seen since they escaped their bus. Now, despite escaping random death 3 times, they're just instantly swallowed up and killed by the earthquake. Then we go back to Yamato talking to Zeus. Now, Zeus says he's straight up the god creator of everything, and he only looks like Mazinger because that's the temporary form of God that Yamato had in his head. He also says that this universe is way too out of order and full of demons, and therefore he has to reset it. Another earthquake goes off and destroys the entire Mu army. Then a tsunami goes off and double destroys the Mu city. God tells Yamato that he has to reset the universe to prevent demons from existing. So he gets super biblical at this point and reveals that anyone who commits too much war or kills too many people, in God's view, is a demon. And therefore he has to reset the earth, and he apparently reset the earth before, because when he made the Garden of Eden, all the people there turned into demons. So Prince Eldorado, his wizard, and Cat Karu suddenly all die in a landslide. God keeps monologuing that God Mazinger was his test to see if human beings were worth existing or not, and by and large they failed, so he's just going to reset the universe. But Yamato begs him not to do this because he's in love with Ira Mu. And at this point, Iremu falls into a hole. But because Iremu has the psychic power to teleport, she teleports to where God Mazinger is in space and is instantly reunited with Yamato being naked in space. Anyway, since the two of them are naked in space together, they randomly just start having sex with each other as the island of Mu crashes into the ocean. So God Mazinger is just awkwardly watching these two people having some pretty standard heterosexual sex, and something about the sex really moves him. So he decides to reward them for having random sex by letting them spend their final moments making love and saving a small piece of the island of Mu, which will become Japan. And therefore, he also allows Ira and Yamato to be reincarnated, so if there's ever a problem again, they can get the God Mazinger back and go fight the demons. So that's the end of the story. Oh, there's actually one more minor epilogue scene where Cutie Honey and her boyfriend finish talking to the old man, and they joke that that was the dumbest story they ever heard, and that the concept of reincarnation is inherently flawed. So they walk off being lightly in love with each other and having a nice summer day. So yeah, that's how God Mazinger the manga ends. Alright, that was a manga. So yeah, I have some thoughts heading away from this. Now, this seems like it was kind of a weird attempt to reboot Devilman as a Mazinger series. God Mazinger is super similar to Devilman in its appearance and the fact that it has a god inside of it that some people consider to be a demon, though apparently the god inside it considers anyone who does bad murder and stuff to be demons. And anyhow, Yamato and Kaoru, like I said, they were cookie cutter clones of Akira and Miki, which leads to the big twist that the manga really takes several big cues from Devilman, including the angels and the demons, and the various Bible trivia facts that go into God Mazinger's backstory. The series focuses heavily on medieval style like army warfare, but then that often gets brushed aside for the typical giant robot on giant robot battles. If I had to say where the manga went wrong, it seems like it was trying to set itself up to have like a really long run, but then it just got abruptly canceled, which is why like they were dropping the bare beginnings of new plot lines of like Kaoru being a cat, the isekai survivors, the three-way struggle between King Eldorado, Prince Eldorado, and the wizard guy. So when the manga ultimately runs out of steam, it just leaves all those characters to die instantly in like a series of natural disasters. All the villains suck though. King Eldorado was just a scary garbage monster man. His son actually seemed like he was going to be even more interesting, especially compared to the anime, but he really died just as his story was really starting to get good. And then, what's amazing, if you consider all the individual tracks that the individual characters had, Yamato went back in time to murder dudes. He became a god, and he saved the world by having sex with the most gorgeous woman in the world at that time. That's literally crazy that the ending of the story is he saves the world by having sex. Meanwhile, the parallel story with Kaoru's insane downfall is in some ways the most interesting story of the manga, if not the darkest. I've seen so many childhood girlfriend characters in anime, and yeah, there's occasionally the anime where the girlfriend character just gets discarded by the wayside because the protagonist loses interest with her, or takes more interest in another girl. Frau Bow and Gundam comes to mind, but I've never seen a female childhood best friend girl character who's just been absolutely shitted on, absolutely destroyed, absolutely suffered on the level that Kaoru in this manga goes through. Like, Kaoru is just the saddest childhood girlfriend character I've ever seen in a manga or an anime. Lastly, there's Iremu. Iremu was just more of an actual leader in a manga than the constant hostage princess she was in the anime. And yeah, her sex drive and sex appeal was like pushed up to the literal maximum that they could push it. Now, I don't normally judge mangas, but I'm going to give this manga a solid 7, being a very entertaining piece of media with an actual point, unlike the anime, which was just fucking pointless filler, like for fucking 20 episodes. Now, quick pros and cons. The manga is a very, very unique story that juxtaposes a bunch of crazy concepts. It has the simultaneous vibe of a classic Mazinger series, Devilman, an ancient war series, and a sci-fi series all at the same time. Kaoru has a very awful but interesting story. And the ending has this double whammy of a crazy anime ending, but also kind of a dark Twilight Zone ending because, you know, they leave it with Cutie Honey walking away laughing at this whole story. But the fact of the matter is that a bus of school children did get isekai'd to their deaths, so that's pretty crazy actually. Now, cons, the abrupt ending of the story just completely ruins it. Like, if they could have just had, like, one more chapter to, like, wrap up Prince Eldorado, defeat him properly, maybe give Kaoru a happy ending instead of leaving her to die as a cat. That would have been better. There's just a lot of storylines that they start off and do not satisfactorily end in the series. Because, like I said, they were trying to stretch it out and then they had to cancel it, like, in what seems like 2 volumes, so yeah. Oh boy. That was a rough one. Alright, so this is my first ever manga review, and wow, reviewing this manga took me a very long time. I guess it's because I did review the whole thing and it was like so incredibly long. Do you guys want me to do more old manga reviews? Let me know, because I will consider it. There's a couple other old mangas I've read recently, like Robot Detective K, which are also just as weird. So, yeah, let me know, guys. Alright, thanks. I'll catch you next time. Please subscribe. I still need those 300 subscribers. I'm out.